Alright, I'll show a little bit of my resampling and reprogramming process here. So what I've done here already is I've used a script that I created to generate all these MIDI events with MIDI data in them. So it's one note per event, and they're named in such a way that this name, together with the name of the track here, which is the microphone position, that together creates the name of the sample, the actual file that will be outputted. So I've already done the outputting, but basically then I just select all the tracks. I go here into render, then I use these settings, these wildcards, to name the sample. And as you can see here, it puts them in a particular folder, and each sample, each file will have its own unique name. As you can see, it would output 148 samples. Now, I've already done this, as watching a progress bar is not particularly riveting. Doesn't take that long, to be honest. It's maybe half a minute or a minute or so. It's pretty quick. So then in the creator tools, I run a additional script which then organizes the samples into a folder structure. I already ran that as well. And then from there, it creates an instrument here, which I then can push into Kontakt. So basically what I have to do inside of Kontakt is create a new instrument. And then in the creator tools, I run my script. Now, normally it would also do the organization of the samples, but it has already done that. So in this case, it just created the instrument here, as you can see. And it's created groups and zones, and it's already mapped the samples as best it can. So now I can just push this. And then I have my named instrument here. And if I go into mapping, as you can see, the samples are there. Now, there are small gaps here. That is because I looked at the Sonovox Kontakt version, and I noticed that on some pitches they reused a sample. So I'm assuming that those samples are not in the original set either. I'm pretty sure it's not chromatically sampled, but the Sonovox version does seem to suggest it is. I'm not really sure, to be honest, if it's chromatically sampled or whole tone sampled. Okay, so from here, what I think I'll go ahead and do is create a couple of new groups and organize these samples a little bit further. So first thing I'm probably going to do is make sure these gaps are filled. So, well, actually, first thing I'm going to do is move some of the samples into new groups, create one for each dynamic layer. Okay, so let's create a group, call this one P, MP, MF, and then one for the top dynamic. Now what I'm going to do is copy these and paste them into the appropriate zone. So the bottom ones are the P, and let me enable the selected group as well. Otherwise, yeah, I'm not going to be pasting into the correct group. So let's copy these ones, the middle dynamics, into this group, paste, and these one go in here. And the top ones go into the F group. So let's paste those. Now I can delete this group. Yep, there we go. All right, so we have 4 groups now. Now there are a couple of things we need to do. I disabled the selected groups again so that I can just view all the samples if I select all these groups by holding Shift and clicking, so I can view all the samples at once. So yeah, first thing we will need to do is close the gap here. So I'm just going to select these samples, pitch them down. All right, there we go. All right, the other thing we have to do is, if we look at the P dynamic, for example, you can see it's only mapped to this velocity range. We want to map it across the entire velocity, because this is one of the things with the Sonovox versions, is they have things mapped to velocities. So only certain velocities trigger certain dynamics, and we want it to be on the mod wheel instead. So every velocity is always going to trigger all of the dynamics, but some of them are going to be inaudible due to the crossfading. So we just want to expand these so they are across the entire velocity range. Yep, let's do that. Yeah, so one other thing, if you've never tried editing anything in Kontakt before, you can only drag down on the sample that is selected, which is the one that has a slightly has a yellow border around it. So if I click, drag and select all the way to the bottom, for example, it's going to be this one, this the selected sample. So that's where I get the handle to drag down. I cannot do that over here. So yeah, it's a little bit finicky. All right, so if I try to play back a note now, you're going to hear that a few things are going to go wrong. So as soon as I release my finger from the keyboard, it's going to stop playing the sample, and there's no fade out or anything. Now we want to do two things. We want to fade out very quickly actually the playing sample, and then also trigger the release sample, which basically is going to be the same sample but starting from the very end. So you hear the echo or the reverb from the room. So the first thing we're going to do is apply a slight fade out at the end, and the way to do this is to select all these groups. Oh, not the edit flag. By shift selecting them. You can also do this from the expert view, which is sometimes actually easier than having to go back up here. And then we are going to go down and into the amplifier, right click on the volume and create a envelope. Now this will already set a release value of 1.1 seconds. So if I now play a note, it will have a fade out of 1.1 seconds. So that's already better. I'm going to slightly adjust these. I don't need that long of a fade out. I think 800 milliseconds is probably enough. I also tend to set the sustain up all the way. There's no need for a decay. I'm just going to create a very simple curve. As for the attack, it can probably be 0. That very much depends on how the samples were made. But yeah, if I zoom in on one at the start here, it looks like we can just, it looks like it starts at a 0 volume, so but maybe a 1 millisecond attack. Okay, so with that part done, we have a little bit of a fade out, but now we have to create the actual release so that when the key is released, the end of the sample plays. The way I do it is I just select all these groups, right click and duplicate them, and then I'm going to rename them and just add release to it at the end. So there we go. And these groups are going to contain all the same samples as their originals. So there we go. Now with these groups selected and then the selected groups only, so now I only have all the groups selected with release samples. I'm going to select all these samples, go into the wave editor. I'm going to set the start position towards the end here, and then copy that setting over to all groups. So let me just set it somewhere towards the end there, wherever I think the release should be. Now, of course, normally you spend a little bit more time on this. Preferably you set the release, the starting point for the release samples for every sample individually, and the same for the non-release samples. But I'm just kind of going through this quickly. So we've set it here at the very end, and then I'm going to use this button here, this little cogwheel, and go to all selected zones and copy the current sample start settings. So it's going to copy this starting position to all these selected zones. So you see, if I select any of these, they all have a start position at the end there. All right. So now what we need to do is actually make sure that these samples are being triggered when the note is released. And fortunately, that's pretty easy. We just have a release trigger here. So let's hear what it sounds like now if we release the note. So I made a mistake, and this happens to me quite a lot. Okay, my actual mistake was that I had all the edit flags set on all these groups, and that I enabled release trigger on all of them. I only want the release trigger behavior to be on these release groups. So I'm going to deselect the release groups, or disable the edit flag on them, and then I'm going to turn off release trigger on the regular groups. So as you can hear, we play the sample, there's a slight fading out, and then the release sample plays. So that's sounding pretty nice already. One other thing that is currently happening is that all these groups are playing, or at least the 4 regular groups and then the 4 release groups are all playing at the same time. You can see this because if I turn off group solo, you can see they're all yellow. So, and you can also see the audio symbol there, which indicates that they're playing. So the next step is going to be to make sure that we travel through these dynamics using the mod wheel using CC1. So we basically have to modulate the volume for each of these groups based on the position of the CC1 controller. So we're going to select all these groups and make sure that all the edit flags are set on all of them. We're going to go down here, right click on the volume again, click on external sources MIDI CC. So now we will have created a table here, or a curve, and so that when MIDI CC is low, the volume is going to be very low for all of these groups, and when it's MIDI CC is high, the volume is going to go up for all these groups. Now at this point, very importantly, we want to start working in individual groups. I had all of these edit flags selected because we do need this curve on all of them, but the curve needs to be different between the various groups, so that's why I'm deselecting all these other ones. So if we are going to go into the lowest dynamic, then well, the low dynamic, we want to be at a high volume when MIDI CC1 is low, and we want it to be at a low volume, or basically inaudible, when MIDI CC1 is high. So I'll fast forward a little bit now and create a better curve here. Okay, so the curves I've created are a little bit like this. So for the lowest dynamic, it actually starts at not its full volume at the start, because it kind of fades in, and then at 25% it's at its maximum volume, and then 50% it's completely dropped out, and then you know, at that point the lower middle dynamic has faded in, etc., until at the very end of the MIDI CC we have the highest dynamic layer, and we can actually play a note and hear it. So it's reasonably smooth, but again, you'd probably want to spend quite a bit of time in here fine-tuning these curves. There are two other things. One is that if I move my MIDI CC pretty quickly as I play a note, you're going to hear a little bit of crackling and popping. And the way to fix this is to set a lag value here. And we're going to do this for all of these groups, so let's set the edit flag on all of them. And let's do 100 milliseconds of lag, which is basically going to smooth out the transition, the crossfade. So if we listen now, you do not hear that cracking and popping anymore, even if I move the fader, the MIDI CC pretty quickly. The other thing is, if I hold a note long enough, eventually we're going to hit the end of the sample. And that's probably not what I want. And also, as you can hear at the very end, if I release the note, it will still play the release sample. So yeah, what we have to do is make sure that all our sustained samples are looping. The next step is going to be to select all of our groups, select all the zones, and then go down into the wave editor and create a loop. And then configure this loop so that we do not include too much of the start, and definitely we do not want the silence at the end. So you go to the edge and drag the loop in. It's pretty self-explanatory. Then we also have to set a crossfade, because when it hits the end here, it's going to, well, loop back around to the start here. And yeah, so I'm just going to enter a value of about, let me see, 10,000. And you can see the crossfade area here. So this might have to become a little bit larger, but we'll see. Now, ideally, you would create an individual loop for every individual sample. But in this case, I'm just going to copy it to all the samples, this one loop. So with that now done, we should be able to play a note, and it should loop indefinitely. So let's give it a try. So yeah, that works. It's a little bumpy. Again, this is why you'd probably want to create a different loop for every individual sample, but again, it takes a lot of time to do. Now, one more thing we probably want to do is apply the same volume curves that we had created for these various dynamics, or the same MIDI-CC volume modulators, and apply those to the release as well, because we do not want to be hearing the release for the soft sample if our MIDI-CC is way up and we're in the highest dynamic. We only want to hear the release of the highest dynamic. So we're going to, well, actually, let me go back to the low dynamic group here and save out this curve. So I'll just call this P for now, and then we'll do these ones as well. All right, and I'm going to enable the editing on these other groups. And let's expand this curve and load in the P here. And then for MP, we'll do the MP curve, etc. So now one way we can test this is we can enable group solo on the Forte release, for example. So now I should only be hearing this sound when I release a key, and my MIDI-CC is up very high. So let's give that a try. So I have my MIDI-CC down low, and we do not hear it, but I'll move it up high now. So yeah, that seems to work. So let's try play a chord or something. Oh, sorry, I have to disable the group solo. So I think the release is a little bit too present. So what I'm going to do is go back to edit all the releases, and then scroll all the way down to our attack and release curve here, and maybe make the attack a little bit, basically the attack is the fade in, make it a little bit higher, like, I don't know, 120 milliseconds. I'm just trying things. You can probably get away with a little lower. Okay, so now we can start actually doing a couple of fun things and add some filters to make the transition between the various dynamics even smoother. And so one thing that Kontakt has for this is an AET morph filter, which is basically, it kind of tries to build up an EQ profile of the samples in the various dynamics, and then dynamically adjust the EQ as you move through the dynamic layers. Now there is one very important thing about this. At least for Kontakt 6, I do not know about Kontakt 7 or 8, but for Kontakt 6, your samples have to be at 44.1 kilohertz, otherwise you're going to get cracks and popples at 48 kilohertz. So I exported all the samples at 44.1. So the way to do this is to go into the, for example, the lowest dynamic, select all the zones, right click, and then create AET morph layer. Now, here's another fun Kontakt bug. I have to enter a name here, but I cannot enter it until I've clicked, and then click the button again, and now I can give it a name. So yeah, you can leave most of these settings as normal. This is just the range of the sample that it's going to analyze. So I'm going to hit OK. It's going to analyze the samples. Then I'm going to go into the lower middle dynamic. Again, make sure you have selected group only enabled here, because otherwise you're going to be selecting zones for samples in other groups. So I'm going to select these and create a morph layer for that as well. Do the fun ticking and unticking of the button so I can enter a name. I'm going to do the same thing for this layer. Oh, yeah, I still have to do that. And then finally for the Forte layer. Now, if any of these samples were, if you ever swap out a sample or anything like that to change it, you will have to rebuild these morph layers. So be aware of that. Now we're going to right click again, and we're going to open the AT morph map editor. And we're going to give a name to this map. Oh, okay, this time I can type in here. Last time I had to click and unclick this button as well in order to be able to type here, but sure. We're just going to enter a name here. Click add, and then we're going to select our morph layers and put them in the morph map. Then we're going to hit OK. Oh, right, it gave an error because I have velocity morph selected here. We want an articulation morph instead. So now we have a morph layer, and now what we are going to do is enable the editing on all our regular layers, actually on our releases as well. I want to make sure we apply this across the board. And then in the group insert effects, we're going to add the filter, which I think is, under utilities. Then here we can select our created morph map. And now we're going to, I'm not sure out of the box if it, no, I don't think it maps automatically the morph value to MIDI CC1. So we have to do external sources, MIDI CC. And let's see, that should do it, I think. Let's give this a try. So you can see how the EQ gets adjusted depending on which group, or in this case, which layer we're in. And if I move the mod wheel, we are traveling through those layers. So that helps a little bit with smoothing out the crossfades. Now there's another thing we can do, is we can go into the script editor and add a script here from the factory. And I always forget where it is, but I think it's in tuning, and it's dynamic pure tuning. Now this is going to tune into the notes when you play one chord and then move into the next one, and that can add a little bit of realism. So let me just up the time a little bit. One other thing I just noticed is that the attacks, if I do these alternating kind of chords, the attack on the second chord is a little on the loud side. So I probably want to adjust the attacks here for the non-release samples. So let me select those and make this perhaps a little bit higher. I'm gonna do 10. So one other thing you could do here is make this attack depend on the velocity with which the keys are being hit. So there's all kinds of modulation you can do to smooth out those kinds of issues. But let's give this a try. So yeah, I think that's pretty decent. I'd fine-tune this a lot more. There are other things you can do. For example, at the lowest dynamic, you can have a low pass filter, so that the high frequencies get cut off the quieter you get, and you could do the opposite at the top dynamic. But yeah, I think that's basically it for now. So now we've created a sustain patch, and then from here you can add a zip script for the legato. And yeah, that's basically it, I think.